Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening once again, friends. You know what time it is. Close that closet door, pull those sheets up just a little tighter. Brace yourself for another night of sinister stories, shattered memories, and the kind of truths that are left undiscovered. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and tonight's episode is all about boundaries. Not the kind your therapist begs you to set, but the kind that creak open in basements, echo down forgotten hallways, or hum with static from a locked room you swore was empty. And of course, I'm joined, as always, by a man who doesn't need a map to find trouble, Mr. Malcolm Blackwood.
That's right, Otis. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some rooms were sealed for a reason. And tonight we'll take our listeners deep into places they were never meant to go. A condemned school hallway, a haunted childhood home, a locked cabinet carved with forgotten symbols, a room that wasn't just off limits, but hungry.
From urban legends that feed on fear to ancient wood that remembers more than it should, these tales all share one warning. Some thresholds don't lead anywhere safe. So buckle up, turn down the lights, and whatever you do, don't go poking around where you don't belong. Before we get going, just a quick reminder, if you love what we do here each week and want even more scares without the interruptions,
join our patrons area for full-length episodes ad-free. Every story, every scare, the way it was meant to be heard. Plus, unlock hundreds of hours of chilling audio from our entire Simply Scary Podcast Network archive.
All of it for just $7.99 a month, or even save more with an annual plan. Just visit simplyscarypodcast.com, click on the Patrons tab, and you'll be transported to chillingtalesfordarknights.com, our very own vault of nightmares.
Support indie horror, feed your fears, and keep the darkness alive. Now, back to the show.
Our first tale tonight is from Craig Groshek and follows a group of high school seniors chasing a local legend beneath their condemned school. A padlocked locker, a dare, and 60 seconds that go horribly wrong. Because some lockers don't just store secrets, they keep them. This is Locker 119 by Craig Groshek, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Part 1. The lower levels of Ashford High had been sealed off years ago, after a pipe burst during a particularly harsh winter and flooded the basement with rancid water. Mold took root, the ceilings sagged, and several classrooms on the lowest floor were condemned. Since then, the district made only half-hearted attempts to renovate. New paint and fluorescent bulbs were slapped onto the upper levels, while the old stairwells leading to the basement were cordoned off with caution tape and brittle metal signs warning students to keep out. Most did, but like any school with a locked door and a few decades of history, Ashford gave rise to its own urban legend, one whispered through lower cracks, scrawled on bathroom stalls, and occasionally shared on ghost story subreddits with just enough local detail to make it believable. They called it Locker 119. Raleigh Montgomery had heard the story a dozen different ways. In some versions, the kid inside was a freshman pledging to join a now-defunct wrestling team and had been forced into the locker as part of some twisted initiation rite. In others, he was a loner with no friends, shoved inside by bullies who didn't realize the door had rusted shut until it was too late. But the core of the tale never changed. He'd screamed for help, and hours passed. When they finally pried it open, he was gone. Not dead, but vanished without a trace. There was no body or blood, just deep gouges on the metal interior, as if something had used its fingernails or teeth to try and claw its way out. Tyler mentioned it again over lunch on Thursday, the way he always did, when he was bored or he had a Red Bull on an empty stomach. "We should go see it," he said, grinning across the table at Riley and the others. "Seriously, it's still down there, padlocked and everything." "No, it's not," Jules muttered, eyes flickering up from her phone. "The whole basement's sealed. The area was condemned like 10 years ago." "That's what they want you to think," Tyler said. "But my cousin knew a guy who worked maintenance back in the day. He says the old locker's still there, covered in warning labels. The school welded it shut." Casey scoffed, rolled her eyes, and tossed a grape at him. "You sound like a Reddit thread. My cousin knew a guy. Come on, Tyler, give us a break." Riley didn't say anything. He just leaned back and let the argument bounce around the table. Tyler loved this kind of thing. His favorite pastime was finding a creepy story, making it personal, and daring everyone else to disprove it. 2 months ago, it was the story about the dead girl in the mirror who only appeared if you said her name at exactly 2:03 a.m. He'd stayed up all night in the bathroom with a mirror and a GoPro. The video showed nothing, but he swore the footage had been corrupted and that something scratched him while he slept. Riley hadn't believed a word of it. Still, part of him appreciated the enthusiasm, if for no other reason than it spiced up an otherwise uneventful senior year. Jules pushed her tray away. "If it's welded shut, there's nothing to see." "Well, that's the whole point," Tyler said. "It's not welded shut. Not anymore. They tried sealing it, but it always reopens. Every time. People hear noises from it when they walk past the basement stairwell. There's, like, breathing or crying, and if you scream while you're inside—" "Let me guess," Casey interrupted. "It eats you." Tyler leaned forward, eyes wide. "Exactly. That's so dumb." "It's a legend trip," he said. "You go to the haunted spot, bring a flashlight, and see what's real. Urban explorer stuff. One of us goes in. We keep the door shut for like 60 seconds. We film it and debunk the whole thing. That's it." Jules was already shaking her head. "I'm not getting detention for your stupid YouTube clout." "No one's getting caught," Tyler said. "We wait till Friday night. Riley's got the master key from his uncle." Riley sat up a little straighter. "I said I saw the master key, Tyler. I didn't say I was taking it." "But you could," Tyler said, grinning. "Right?" Riley hesitated. The keyring had been hanging on a wall hook in his uncle's garage for months, ever since he'd retired from the district's maintenance crew. The tags were worn, but some of them still listed building codes. He knew at least 3 of them opened doors at Ashford, and that one was labeled BL Stair, which had to mean basement-level stairwell. "I don't know, man," Riley said. "If we get caught down there, we won't just get detention. They'll suspend us." "Only if we tell someone," Tyler said. "But we won't. It's just us. Friday night, in and out." Jules folded her arms. "I'm still not going inside that thing. No way." Tyler raised his hands. "Fine. We'll draw straws or flip a coin. Whatever." "But come on, it's senior year. This is our last shot to do something that people will actually remember." Riley looked around the table. Casey was pretending to be annoyed, but he wasn't leaving. Jules was anxious but intrigued, and Riley could already tell she'd cave by tomorrow. As for Tyler, there wasn't a force on Earth short of the apocalypse that would stop him once he latched onto something like this. "What time?" Riley asked, sighing in resignation. Tyler's grin widened. "Meet behind the gym, 11:30. Don't be late." Friday came faster than Riley expected. The school day dragged by in slow, syrupy time. Each class a countdown to whatever waited beneath the building. By the time he got home, his stomach was already in knots. The key had been easy enough to pocket. His uncle wouldn't miss it for a night, and Riley planned to return it first thing Saturday morning. Still, holding it in his hand gave him a strange feeling, like he was about to unlock something meant to stay closed. At 11:26, he met the others behind the gym. The building loomed above them, black and foreboding in the late March gloom. Casey wore a hoodie pulled tight around her face. Jules carried a duffel bag with flashlights and a phone tripod. Tyler, of course, brought nothing but his phone and an oversized grin. "Ready to make history?" he asked, slapping Riley on the back. "No," Riley said, "but let's go anyway." They circled around to the old service entrance. Most of the doors had been rekeyed over the years, but the one near the boiler room still matched the BL stair key. It clicked after 2 tries, and the middle door groaned open with a sound that echoed down into the dark. A set of narrow stairs descended into the belly of the building. The smell hit them first, one of wet, mildew, stale air, and a faint bite of chemical cleaners left to rot in closed spaces. They clicked on their flashlights and moved in. The basement hallway was worse than Riley imagined. Water stains marred the ceiling tiles, and a tangle of exposed wires hung like vines from broken fixtures. The walls bore remnants of the school's past, including outdated posters for blood drives and chess tournaments, and a faded banner welcoming the class of 1998. Beneath it all, graffiti was scrawled in frantic, angry strokes. Most of it was nonsense, but one word appeared again and again in black Sharpie. "Don't." The locker stood at the far end of the hallway. Even in the flashlight beams, it looked unreal, as though it had not been installed but grown from the wall itself. The metal was warped and blistered with rust, its door bent slightly inward. Across the surface, dozens of stickers and paper signs had been affixed over the years. Most were yellowed with age, their edges curling. "Sealed for safety. Do not open. Danger. Condemned." A thick metal padlock hung from the latch, its shackles snapped. Tyler stepped forward first, scanning the locker with his light. "See? What did I tell you? It's real." Casey shivered. "This doesn't prove anything." Jules stayed back, her arms crossed tightly. "So," Tyler said, turning, "who's going in?" No one answered. Riley's fingers curled around the key in his pocket. A part of him wanted to speak up, volunteer, and get it over with, but something about the locker made his throat tighten. Tyler clapped his hands. "Fine, we'll draw. The short straw goes inside." 60 seconds. I'll keep time." They drew, and Riley didn't draw the short straw. Tyler did. He hesitated just for a second, then puffed up his chest and stepped toward the locker. He wedged himself into it, adjusting until his back hit the far wall, and his knees drew up against his chest. It was a tight fit, but he didn't seem fazed. "You better be filming," Tyler said, smirking. "I want slow-motion reactions when I start screaming. Start counting." Casey held up her phone and Jules aimed the flashlight. Riley did the same, though his hands felt less steady than before. 60 seconds, Casey said, "starting now." Tyler gave a mock salute, leaned back, and pulled the door closed with a metallic clang. The latch clicked shut. Part 2. Riley stared at the locker in silence. His phone was still recording, but he'd forgotten all about it. For a long while, no one said anything. Then, somewhere deep inside the locker, metal shifted. A soft knock echoed out, followed by Tyler's voice, muffled, casual, and slightly amused. "Okay," he called out. "It's tight in here. You guys better be counting." Casey checked her phone. 58, 57. Another knock came, a little sharper this time. "All right," Tyler said. "That's hilarious. Which one of you locked it?" No one answered. "You guys seriously didn't lock it?" Tyler asked. Casey turned to Riley. "Did you touch the latch?" Riley shook his head, his eyes fixed on the door. "Of course not. I didn't even bring the lock." "I'm not kidding," Tyler cried. "Let me out. Come on, you guys. This isn't funny." Casey stepped forward and gave the handle a quick tug. It wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," she said. She tried harder, again. Harder this time to no avail. Tyler's tone sharpened. "Okay, joke's over, you guys. Knock it off. Open the goddamn door." "Hold on, we're trying," Jules said, stepping in to help. She gripped the latch and pulled with both hands, planting a foot against the locker bank to brace herself. The handle refused to budge. Tyler pounded on the inside. "Open it!" he screamed, his voice cracking, rising fast and thinned by panic. Casey turned, looking back down the hall. "We didn't do anything. Just hang on." Another blow landed from within, harder, then another. Riley moved to the side of the door and grabbed the edge with both hands. The metal was cold, far colder than it should have been. He tried pulling it open while Jules kicked the front panel near the bottom. Tyler screamed, not playfully or for show, but from the gut, his voice filled with raw, unfiltered terror. "Help me out!" he shouted frantically. "Hurry! Something's coming!" And then, from behind Tyler, there came another sound. At first, it was hard to separate. Tyler's voice was still there, but it was layered with the sound of something wet sliding across metal. It moved behind him, deeper than the locker should allow, dragging its body, its limbs, against the steel. The locker vibrated. It was subtle at first, a low-frequency hum, like that of distant machinery, which passed through their feet and up their legs. As they listened, it grew stronger, filling the hallway and settling the air around them into motion. "Tyler!" Casey shouted, banging her fists against the door. "What's in there with you? What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Tyler's screams tore through the corridor. He shouted their names and screamed to be let out, shrieking words that made no sense. And then everything stopped. The pounding, the screaming, the vibrations. The hallway went still. Casey reached for the handle again. This time, effortlessly, it moved. The latch came free with a tired metallic snap, and the locker door swung open. Riley stepped back instinctively. It was empty. Locker 119 showed no signs of damage. There was no blood, there was no dents, and there was no trace of Tyler. The inside looked just as it had minutes before, narrow and dark, lined with scuffed steel and pre-existing scratches. Casey leaned in. "Tyler?" There was no answer. Jules turned slowly to look back the way they'd come. The corridor beyond the flashlight beams remained dark and unmoving. "He didn't come out," she said. "There's no way. He never passed us. He couldn't have." Casey moved the light across the inside of the locker. "There's nowhere for him to go. It's a locker. It's a goddamn locker." Riley felt himself drifting forward. His light followed hers, sweeping across the narrow walls. Something about the space felt distorted. The interior looked wrong. Shadows didn't fall evenly, and the back of the locker seemed deeper than it should have been. He tried to follow the contours of the metal, but the further in he looked, the more the space seemed to stretch until, at last, it no longer reflected the light. He stepped away, shaking. "We have to go," Jules said. Riley nodded and shut the door. The click echoed down the hall with finality. Jules led the way out, moving quickly but carefully, flashlight never wavering. Casey followed close behind. Riley lingered only once, halfway up, glancing back over his shoulder into the gloom below. The air smelled faintly like burnt plastic, and the stairwell was empty. "Tyler," he said under his breath, before turning back and making his exit. "Where are you?" Part 3. The four of them didn't stop moving until they were well past the side lot, where the edge of the school grounds blurred into the tree line. There, under the thin sodium yellow glow of a street lamp, they finally paused, their breath clouding in the cool night air. Riley didn't remember unlocking the exterior door, scrambling up the final steps, or pushing the handle with shaking hands. His flashlight was still in his grip, beam flickering weakly across a patch of dead grass. Jules, who had practically sprinted ahead of everyone, stood still, facing away from the group. Casey was the first to break the silence. "We don't talk about this," he said. "To anyone." Riley looked at her. "He's gone, Casey." "You think I don't know that?" she snapped. "We'll say he left, that he ran away. We don't tell anyone we were there. That place wasn't supposed to be open. Do any of you want to explain to the school how we got in? What we were doing?" "What we were doing," Jules barked, turning to Casey. "You make it sound like we shoved him in there." "I'm just saying," Casey said, quieter now, "that we didn't do anything. Not really. We didn't force him." "He volunteered," Riley said, though the words felt hollow once they'd left his mouth. "Exactly," Casey replied. "We didn't even touch the lock. It just stuck." No one argued with that. Eventually, Jules nodded. "We go home. We don't say anything. We wait." They all agreed, not because it felt right, but because there was no clear alternative. Riley lay in bed until dawn, not sleeping so much as enduring the night. His window overlooked the side yard where the trees had long since grown too close to the house. Each creak of the siding, each gust of wind brushing against the glass made him tense. He kept replaying the moment the locker opened, the perfect emptiness, the way it seemed almost smug in how ordinary it looked. By morning, he hadn't received a single message from Tyler. Against all hope, he'd hoped his friend had somehow made his way back home, that this was all some sort of elaborate ruse, another of his pranks. But when he checked, there was nothing on Discord, and he had no unread texts and no new Snapchat messages. He waited until afternoon before reaching out to Tyler himself. "You good? Just checking in. Say something, man." Every last message went unanswered. He told his parents that Tyler had blown him off for a late movie. They bought it and didn't press him. He spent the rest of the day on edge, checking his phone every few minutes. Occasionally, he thought he heard footsteps on the front porch or the back steps, but each time when he investigated, the yard was empty. At school on Monday, Tyler was marked absent. By Tuesday, people were talking. I heard he got suspended. No, he totally ran away. He hated his stepdad. He got arrested. His cousin said he punched a teacher. Each theory seemed plausible enough on its own. As for the school, they made no announcements. Teachers said nothing. Attendance staff only noted his name on the list and moved on. Whatever had happened, the institution itself seemed eager to look the other way. And if Tyler's parents reported him missing or did anything about his disappearance, it certainly didn't show. Riley found it unsettling how quickly Tyler had been wiped from existence. Jules caught up with him during lunch and slid into the seat across from him. Her tray sat untouched, and her eyes were tired. "Still nothing?" she asked. Riley shook his head. "He's not answering me either," she continued. Casey joined them a few minutes later, pretending not to notice the silence. "I heard someone saw him in town yesterday," she said, absent-mindedly peeling the label off a water bottle, "like near the gas station." Riley looked up. "Who said that?" "Some freshman," they replied. "They said he looked weird." Jules rolled her eyes. "Great. Creepypasta nonsense already." "He could have made it back, you know," Casey said. "Then why wouldn't he text us?" No one had an answer for that. 2 nights later, the noises started. Riley stayed late working in the computer lab. It was nearly 7 when he finally stepped into the second-floor hallway and began walking toward the main stairs. The school was mostly empty at that hour, with just a few maintenance carts left out and a custodian's radio playing somewhere in the gym. As he passed the north wing lockers, he discerned a faint, hollow thud, the sound of metal on metal not far ahead. He stopped and listened. Again, he heard it. He moved cautiously, trying to pinpoint the source. The hallway was lit only by emergency fluorescents, casting a dim blue haze along the walls. The sound repeated louder this time, a sharp bang, followed by 3 rapid knocks. Riley stepped forward again, and it stopped. He turned his light toward the locker bank, but there was nothing there. The hallway, however, felt colder than it had earlier. He left quickly after that, telling himself it had been the building settling, one of the custodians, or something falling in a supply closet. Anything but the truth. When he returned the next day, one of the lockers across from where he had been standing had been scratched. The damage was unmistakable. 4 thin lines, roughly vertical, like jagged nails dragged slowly downward, had been carved deliberately into the metal. Even then, Riley preferred to ignore what was happening, but not for long. By Thursday, all 3 of them were showing signs. Jules had developed a habit of glancing over his shoulder every few seconds in class, as though expecting someone to be standing directly behind her. Casey jumped when the intercom buzzed, and she flinched whenever someone shut a locker too hard. Riley had started sitting with his back to the wall at lunch. They avoided talking about it during the day, but every night their group chat filled with fragment reports. A door opened by itself. Footsteps had been heard in an empty stairwell. Lights flickered at just the right moment to make them feel watched. Then, Friday morning, Jules sent a message that stopped Riley cold. "I heard him. In my locker." He called her immediately. "What?" he asked. "What do you mean you heard him?" Jules sounded rattled. It was clear she hadn't slept. "I opened my locker this morning, and something was wrong. It felt off. There was an echo, but I hadn't said anything." "I know that sounds crazy." "An echo?" Riley asked. "I leaned in," she replied. "I don't know why. I just felt like something was in there. And then I heard Tyler whispering." Riley stayed silent. "He said my name," Jules continued. "You're sure?" Riley asked. "I'd know his voice anywhere, Riley." "Was anyone near you?" "No. This was before first bell. The hall was empty." Riley didn't doubt her. He hated that he didn't. That night, Casey called too. She said she'd seen something near her back porch, a figure standing motionless beneath the trees, but by the time she got her dad, it was gone. Riley didn't sleep that night. None of them did. By the following week, everyone was paranoid. Casey started carrying pepper spray in her jacket. Jules switched lockers and began arriving late and leaving early. Riley stopped using the upstairs bathrooms, preferring to walk the extra distance just to avoid the hallway where he'd heard the knocks. None of it helped. No matter where they went, each of them felt the sensation of being watched. Behind locker doors, through keyholes, reflected faintly in dark screens and mirrors. Tyler wasn't just gone, Riley feared. He was somewhere else. Though he tried over and over to convince himself otherwise, he knew Tyler wasn't alone. And whether they wanted to admit it or not, the three of them worried that whatever had taken Tyler, it would come for them too. Part 4. Casey was the next to vanish. It happened on a Wednesday, just before 6th period. She left her geometry class and told someone she was heading to the nurse. She never arrived. Her backpack was found in the main stairwell, zipped and intact, slouched awkwardly against the wall like she had set it down in mid-step. Her phone was in her jacket pocket, still turned on, still logged into their group chat. No camera had caught her leaving the building. No witnesses saw her exit through any door. One moment she was among classmates, walking a hallway crowded with voices and movement, and the next she was gone. The administration assumed she'd followed in Tyler's footsteps, left school, and skipped town. Maybe they figured it was some sort of pact between two troubled kids. That explanation took hold fast. Teachers mentioned counseling resources. The principal made a statement over the intercom that afternoon about safety and compassion. Posters went up in the library. Riley passed one on his way to 3rd period the next morning and had to look away. Jules didn't come in at all. Riley found her just off campus behind a strip of dead trees near the faculty lot. She was sitting cross-legged in the grass, staring at the fallen leaves. "She's not coming back," Jules said, before Riley could speak. He sat beside him, legs stiff. "No." "I think it was waiting," Jules added. "For what?" "For us to break," she said. "To see who'd crack first." "Well," Riley said, looking at the dirt, "it doesn't have to wait anymore." They stopped pretending after that. That night they met at Riley's house and combed through everything they could find. Old posts on local message boards, archive pages from paranormal sites, urban legend aggregators with grainy images of the school in the background. Most of the stories were inconsistent, offering contradictory timelines, different names, or locations that didn't quite match. Even then, a pattern emerged. Other students had gone missing from Ashford before, and not just recently. Over the years, a handful of disappearances had been recorded quietly, each one resolved unofficially with excuses or conjecture. A student had run away, been expelled, or transferred. There were no official alerts, no press releases. Besides the alarming lack of attention or public outcry, all of the incidents had one thing in common. They were all tied to the same place. The basement level of the school. Locker 119. The oldest mention they found was buried in a post from 2003, long before anyone had labeled the story an urban legend. The author claimed their brother had attended Ashford in the late 1980s. He'd been hazed by upperclassmen and locked in a basement locker for hours. They said his screams were heard all night, but when a janitor finally opened the door the next morning, the locker was empty. What stood out wasn't the story itself, but what came after. The author mentioned returning to the school years later. They had found a maintenance worker cleaning graffiti from the hallway near the gym. When asked about the locker, the worker turned pale and told them not to speak of it again. He told them he heard once a voice down there at night, the voice of a boy calling out for help, repeating the same phrase over and over. "Let me out, please, let me out." Riley printed the post. Jules highlighted the dates, and they kept reading. They found a local news story from 1996, about a student pulled from school grounds in a disassociative state. The piece was brief and vague, but the boy had been discovered just outside a set of rusted double doors near the boiler room entrance. He was described as unresponsive and murmuring incoherently. According to a follow-up from a community blog years later, that boy never returned to school. He spent the rest of his adolescence in a long-term care facility. They both knew what the doors led to. Jules clicked off the screen and pushed her chair back. Whatever's ever in there, it doesn't end at the locker doors. Riley looked at her. It's not the locker, Jules continued. Not really. It's what's in it, or what comes out of it. It follows. Once someone hears, once it's been fed, it remembers. Jules nodded. They were quiet for a long time after that. Jules was the one who finally broke the silence. We can't let it keep doing this, she said. Riley stared at the printout in his lap. What do you expect us to do? I don't know, Jules said. We have to go back. Oh, hell no, Riley protested. We're not going anywhere near that thing again. What about Tyler? We can't let him, Jules said, looking at him, stumbling over her choice of words. If we don't put an end to this, then who will? Riley didn't answer. He opened his mouth to say something, but allowed the words to die on his lips. Jules stood a moment longer, then gathered the papers and flashlight and left without waiting for him. When Jules stepped through the threshold of the basement that night, alone, the beam of her flashlight dimmed noticeably. The smell hit her halfway down the corridor, an overwhelming odor of sour ozone, decayed insulation, and scorched electronics. In addition, the basement hallway felt colder this time. The rust had darkened, and the ceiling tiles, already swollen with moisture, sagged even lower than she remembered. And there, standing at the end of the corridor, was locker 119. It hadn't moved an inch, and yet Jules couldn't shake the feeling that it was lying in wait. She approached slowly, her footsteps muffled by the damp, aging linoleum, and found the door ajar. The gap was narrow, less than an inch, but noticeable. Jules stepped closer to inspect it, her flashlight shaking, certain it hadn't been opened before. No sound of movement came from inside, just the faint suggestion of depth beyond the crack of the door. Jules hesitated, then gripped the edge and pulled it open fully. Darkness greeted her. It curved inward, pulled at the edges of the light, absorbed instead of reflected. The interior of the locker should have ended in steel a few feet in. But what stretched before Jules looked vast and impossible. A chasm lined with corroded panels and exposed wire, replete with ribs of hollow metal, bending inward like the throat of a machine. Hesitantly, Jules stepped forward. She didn't remember deciding to, didn't remember lifting a foot or shifting her weight. But the blackness reached forward just as she leaned in, and the light died. She fell forward, not onto tile or into a locker as expected, but into space. The walls flexed around her as she fell, the air burning with static. The sound of grinding gears roared from all sides, and beneath it all she heard a cacophony of whispers, overlapping voices drawn from her memories and twisted into new shapes. Tyler's voice called her name. So did Casey's. So did her own. Then Jules screamed just once, and she vanished, dragged into the shadows. Part 5. Riley stopped going to school the day Jules disappeared. There's no point anymore. His parents thought he was grieving, which was close enough to the truth that he didn't bother correcting them. The school didn't call. No one came by. Ashford had always been good at letting its stories go quiet after the initial excitement passed. No one asked where Jules had gone, just like no one asked where Tyler or Casey had gone. They were already fading into obscurity. Again, he was struck by the absurdity of it all. Even his friend's parents moved on with alarming rapidity, as if it had been some acquaintance, rather than their children that had gone missing. They could forget, perhaps, for some reason beyond his understanding, but Riley couldn't. He kept seeing jewels at the edge of mirrors, in the reflection of bus windows that passed the house, without stopping. He heard Tyler's voice in the dead hours of the night, not calling to him, but conversing with something, as if in mid-dialogue. Riley did his best to stay strong, but over time, the gravity of what had happened, not to mention the fear that he was next, weighed him down, pulling harder each day. He lasted until Sunday. That day, he went to the garage and packed a crowbar, his grandfather's hammer, and a portable camping lantern into his backpack. Then he tucked a small crucifix into his shirt pocket for good measure, not because he was particularly religious, but because it felt like the kind of thing you brought when you were out of options. That evening at midnight, he stood again at the rusted service door of Ashford High. The school welcomed him in silence. The interior lights were off, and the hallways carried the faint smell of wax and dust. His footsteps echoed faintly across the linoleum as he made his way through the staff wing, then down the back stairwell to the basement. The door opened with a low creak, just as it had before. Below, the air wrapped around him, damp, uninviting, and far colder than he remembered. He clicked on the lantern and held it ahead, letting the white light push back the gloom. The basement had changed. The hallway still sloped downward, and though it still bore the familiar scars of age, crumbling tile, flaking paint, and warped door frames, something about the angles felt different. The walls seemed slightly farther apart. The ceiling arched overhead, higher than it should have been. Even the graffiti had shifted. The warnings, scrawled in black marker, had multiplied, curling up from the walls like veins. And ever present at the far end of the corridor was locker 119. It was already open. Riley stopped and swallowed hard. The door hung ajar, no more than a hand's width, and swayed gently in the still air. He hadn't touched it. To his knowledge, no one had. He approached slowly. With each step, the hallway narrowed, or maybe the locker widened. It was difficult to tell. Its doors seemed taller, stretching toward the ceiling. The stickers and warning signs were nearly gone, stripped away as though peeled from the surface by unseen fingers. Riley reached the threshold and looked inside. He was met with darkness just as before. Mustering all the courage he could, he took another step forward. The moment he crossed the plane of the door, the lantern's light flickered and died, and a voice echoed from within. Riley. It beckoned. He stepped back. Another voice, sharper and higher-pitched, followed. Help me. Then another cried, Don't leave me here. They overlapped, calling his name in alternating cadence. Tyler's voice, Casey's, Jules. Each one was clear and intimate, but decidedly wrong. They weren't begging. They were smiling. He could hear the curvature of teeth behind the words, the suggestion of a grin wider than a human's. He dropped his backpack and pulled his crowbar free. Come in, Riley, the voice cooed, this time resembling his own. He took a step forward and raised the crowbar, ready to slam the door shut, to seal it, bend it, break it. But before he could, the air around him shifted. The hallway expanded, groaning softly, and the floor rippled beneath his feet. He stumbled momentarily, but regained his composure, and before he could second-guess himself, he swung hard, striking the edge of the locker with a deep metallic crack. A shockwave reverberated outward, hurling him backward. He struck the opposite wall and collapsed, his vision blurring. The locker door creaked open further. From within, the void pulsed. Voices rose again, chanting in a language he couldn't hope to understand. There were other sounds as well, wet, rhythmic grinding and static pressure, accompanied by ragged breaths, shrieking metal, and groans of hunger, all layered atop one another in a nightmarish symphony. Riley pulled himself up and staggered forward. "Never going in," he shouted. "This ends tonight. I am the last." The locker responded with a maddening screech, a piercing wail that threatened what little was left of Riley's fleeting sanity. For a moment, Riley's resolve wavered, and he nearly bolted, but as he stared at the locker, crowbar in hand, he thought of his friends and everyone before them that had been lost too, and of the memories that faded with them. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. With a scream of his own, Riley swung the crowbar like a man possessed, slamming the door shut, and then jammed the tool against the lock, embedding it deeply in the metal. In a sparsely furnished expanse of the basement corridor, the sound echoed like a gunshot. The locker's shriek cut off abruptly, its connection to the basement seemingly severed, and Riley collapsed to the basement floor, heaving in disbelief. Was it over, he wondered? Was it really over? He wasn't about to wait to find out. He scrambled to his feet, picked up his bag, and bolted for the stairs. Riley Montgomery never looked back, and he never spoke of the locker or his missing friends again. The school didn't report anything unusual the next day. No one reported any signs of a break-in or any missing items. The janitor paid no attention to the gaping hole in the door of locker 119 or the crowbar lying beside it. He didn't so much as cast a glance at it, and he never would. By the end of the week, however, in spite of everything, someone else was telling the story again. The story of the haunted locker. A freshman dared his friends to go to the basement. They laughed about it in the locker room, then dared each other to get closer and closer to the stairwell door. They swore they saw the knob turn on its own. One of them said they heard something low, mechanical, and wet breathing behind the door. They told the story to friends after class. Someone dared someone else. By the following Monday, new rumors had started. That it's not just locker number 119 anymore. Sometimes it's locker 120. Sometimes it's 117. Sometimes even the lockers in the main hallway were known to make noises late in the day, clicks and pops, and faint rhythmic knocking. Not loud enough to alarm anyone, but enough to notice. Just loud enough to wonder. They say that whatever was inside it has started to move locker to locker, whispering its way down the halls. But so far, no one's been able to prove it. It all sounds ridiculous, and maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. Only a few students discovered the truth, and they're long gone. They say if you stand too close to your locker and listen, really listen, you'll hear voices inside, crying out for help, begging you to open the door. But if you ever hear a knock from the inside, don't open it. Just don't. And whatever you do, if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of the door, no matter how badly you want to, don't scream. Because that's exactly what it wants. And that was Locker 119 by Craig Groshek, as performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
You know, I remember doing some dumb things in high school, Otis, but none of them ended with me vanishing into a locker.
Well, that's the thing about legend trips. Sometimes they're just ghost stories, and sometimes they take someone with them.
Speaking of repeating mistakes, our next tale drops us into a time loop soaked in rage, revenge, and something far worse waiting on the other side. What begins as a simple act of vengeance becomes a personal hell, one where every reset brings pain, fire, and the grinning figure who never forgets. You can pull the trigger 1,000 times, but if time doesn't let you go, you might find yourself killing time in more ways than one. This is Killing Time by Mark Lynch, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood. I approached the Bucket of Blood pub from the other side of the street, waiting to cross after the number 7 bus tore down the road. The neighborhood was quiet on this slow weekday afternoon, and this suited me just fine. I glanced up to the grey clouds above, the drizzly rain falling on my head, but I ignored the miserable weather and focused on my objective, feeling the cold metal of the sawed-off shotgun concealed underneath my trench coat. I paused briefly as I stepped off the road and onto the pavement, a cold chill running through me that had nothing to do with the rain. This all seemed so familiar, like I'd been here before. I don't mean on this road and outside the pub. I mean at this exact moment in time. The rain, the number 7 bus, me on the street with the gun concealed under my coat and a murderous intent in my heart. It was the strangest feeling of déjà vu, and I did hesitate for the briefest of moments. But I put the experience down to last-minute nerves, remembering why I was here today and recalling the deep-seated hatred I carried with me, the overwhelming lust for revenge that drove me. I was going into that pub, and bloody mayhem would ensue. I barged my way inside through the frosted glass doors, the stench of stale smoke, spilt alcohol, and piss hitting my nostrils. Taking a deep breath, I surveyed the inside of the pub in search of my quarry. The establishment was near empty at this time of day. I counted only 3 patrons and the girl behind the bar. Again, the déjà vu hit me as I thought I recognized all present, thinking that I'd seen these people many times before, and they were like old friends by this point. The 2 regulars sat separately in booths facing the bar. There was an old man with grey hair and an unkempt shaggy beard, dressed in a ragged jumper full of holes. His eyes were glazed over and unfocused, and he looked down at the pint on the table in front of him, ignoring all else as he seemed engrossed in his own personal sorrow. The second regular was equally quiet and docile, a middle-aged woman with red hair slowly going grey. She still had glimpses of her youthful beauty, a twinkle in her green eyes and a shapely body hidden under her black dress. But whatever tragedy she'd suffered through in her life had surely taken their toll, along with many years of heavy smoking and alcoholism. She smiled faintly in my direction before returning to her glass of white wine and accompanying cigarette. The barmaid was cleaning glasses when I came in. She was a young and attractive girl with long blonde hair and expressive blue eyes. The barmaid shot me a friendly smile when she saw me enter, saying, "Yes, love, what can I get you?" I ignored her and continued to scan the room in search of my target. I found him standing in the corner, playing on the fruit machine, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. I glared across at my nemesis from the far side of the bar, the raw hatred rising from the pit of my stomach as I prepared myself for the violent retribution to come. 5 years inside, that's what I'd done thanks to this bastard. And when I got out, he treated me like I was nothing, spat on me like I was a mangy dog. This lowlife had shown me no respect, and that was a mistake he wouldn't make again. But Carter didn't even notice my presence at first, as his focus was entirely on the electronic gambling machine, his bald head nodding up and down and his dark eyes burning with that most basic of human instincts, naked greed. I watched on as he pulled the lever and his numbers came up, the machine bursting to life with noise and light as it dispensed a stream of pound coins. "Oh, happy days," Carter exclaimed as he started collecting his winnings in his huge hands. And I decided this was the perfect time to reveal my presence. "Some bastards get all the luck in life," I shouted. Carter suddenly turned in my direction. There was anger at his face at first, but his expression changed to one of contempt once he saw me. Well, look what the cart dragged in." He grinned sadistically, showing off his gold fillings. "Afternoon, Carter," I replied, playing his game for just a bit longer. "It seems we have some unfinished business." "Bollocks we do," Carter shot back dismissively. "I've got nothing to say to you, mate. Now get out of here before you get hurt." I saw red at that moment, as any doubts in my mind were cast aside. In an instant, I pulled the shotgun out from under my coat. The girl behind the bar screamed, but I ignored her whilst pointing the gun at my enemy. Carter was stunned at first, and I savoured the fear I saw in his eyes as he looked down the barrel of my shotgun. But the arrogance soon returned to his grizzled face as he laughed in defiant mockery. "You haven't got the balls, son," he proclaimed. Next, Carter smashed his pint glass and formed the jagged edges into a weapon as he advanced menacingly towards me. I hesitated for only a second before pulling the trigger, experiencing a heavy kickback and the deafening roar as the gun fired. A millisecond later, and buckshot tore through Carter's chest, spraying blood and viscera in all directions as his body was violently thrown backwards, eventually collapsing onto the stained carpet. I stood in shocked awe for a moment, admiring my own grim handiwork as the fatally wounded Carter choked on his own blood and closed his eyes for the last time. I felt like I was living through a dream, or rather, a nightmare. But this all seemed so familiar. The smell of cordite, the blood-stained carpet, the barmaid screaming hysterically, and that sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach as reality hit home. Suddenly, I needed to get out of that damned pub. I couldn't bear to stay at the scene of the crime for even a moment longer. I swung around, seeing the grey-bearded regular now standing up in his booth, his glazed eyes filling with raw terror. He threw his hands up defensively once he saw my still-smoking shotgun, crying, "Please, mate, don't shoot!" I had no interest in taking another life, and so I sprinted towards the door, pushing my way out as the barmaid's screams still rang in my ears. I ran out onto the pavement and intended to make good my escape, but I didn't get far as my path was blocked. The figure who stood in my way was unnerving, to say the least. He was immaculately turned out, wearing a dark three-piece suit, shine shoes, a black tie, and bowler hat. His fancy clothing made him stand out in this working-class neighborhood, but that was the very least of my concerns. It was when I looked to his face that my blood turned to ice. His skin was a deadly shade of pale and seemed to be wrapped around his skull too tight. Meanwhile, the strange man's eyes appeared dark and soulless, like those of a shark. But most disturbing was the unnaturally wide grin plastered across his dry lips, a smile that was anything but friendly. His twisted face was a red flag, as were his claw-like hands. I couldn't explain this dark-suited man's appearance, or even his existence. I didn't feel like he was human, and yet I swore I'd seen him before, believing this dark figure had been haunting my nightmares for a long time. But none of that mattered right then. All I cared about in that moment was escaping from the murder scene, and this weirdo was standing in my way. Instinctively, I raised my gun and aimed at his chest, snarling a threat as I poised my finger on the trigger. "Move, or I'll blow you away." He didn't budge an inch, his unnerving grin not faltering and his dark eyes not blinking. I was scared, terrified even, but I couldn't let this show. "Last chance, mate," I growled. There was no response. I didn't want to shoot this bloke, but he left me no choice. I pulled the trigger, firing the second shell and cutting the strange man down in the middle of the street. But then, something inexplicable occurred. The dark-suited man had fallen to the pavement, but he didn't stay down. I looked on in horror as he dragged himself back up on 2 feet, no blood or wounds evident on his body as he wagged his bony finger at me and spoke in a deep, inhuman voice. "No good, son. Better luck next time." With that, all hell broke loose. I felt an intense heat below my feet as the soles of my boots began to melt. And then the heat and fire was all around me as the entire street was consumed by flames. I dropped my gun and tried in vain to shield my face as the fire grew in intensity and my clothes and skin burnt up. Screaming in total agony, I cast one last look at the still grinning entity before the pain overwhelmed my senses and the darkness took me. I stood on the pavement, drizzly rain falling on my head as I looked across at the Bucket of Blood public house, where I knew my target was currently drinking. I paused before crossing the street as the number 7 bus proceeded down the road. Next came the moment of doubt just before I entered the pub, a strange sense of déjà vu which I wrote off as nerves. Entering the establishment, I was hit by familiar sights, sounds, and smells, but I wrote them all off. Once you've seen one backstreet boozer, you've seen them all. The blonde behind the bar asked me if I wanted a drink. I ignored her. My mind was focused on just one thing, putting that bastard Carter in the ground. I spotted him playing the fruit machine, cheering as he won the jackpot. This only added to my anger. "Some bastards get all the luck," I exclaimed. Carter turned in my direction, voicing an insult which I paid no attention to. My blood was still up as I withdrew the sawn-off from underneath my trench coat and aimed the barrel at Carter's chest. The barmaid screamed in terror, but I ignored her, remaining focused on my target as I poised my finger on the trigger. But I didn't shoot. Instead, I lowered the shotgun as a thought entered my head, a buried memory that I couldn't explain or rationalize. "No, this isn't right," I called out. "I've been here before. I've killed you before. You're already dead, Carter." Carter grinned sadistically, showing off his gold fillings as he answered. "No, mate, sorry to disappoint. I'm not dead, but you're about to be." With that, he smashed his pint glass to form it into a makeshift weapon, charging at me across the pub floor, crying out with a murderous rage in his eyes. I tried to re-aim, but was too slow as Carter closed the gap and grabbed hold of the gun's barrel. The shotgun went off, but the shot was well wide of the mark, and simultaneously Carter knocked me down and went for my throat with the broken glass. A life and death struggle ensued as I desperately fought to save my own skin. I don't know how, but I managed to kick Carter off me before I grabbed hold of the gun, aimed, and fired. The buckshot hit Carter at point-blank range, literally blowing his head clean off and covering me with blood, gore, and skull fragments. I resisted the strong urge to empty my stomach as my brain tried to come to terms with the horror. The ringing in my ears gradually faded, and I heard the barmaid screaming hysterically. Her reaction was understandable given the circumstances, but it was worse than I thought. I was still in a daze as I wiped the blood from my face and surveyed the horrific scene. Carter was clearly dead, his head having been blown off by the blast. But he wasn't the only casualty. The first misplaced shot had inadvertently hit one of the regulars, the red-haired woman in the black dress sitting in the corner booth. The buckshot had almost cut the poor woman in two, her body now slumped over the table as her blood spilled across the carpet. I felt the burning sensation of extreme guilt inside my skull as I realized that this innocent woman had died due to my actions. I didn't want to be there any longer. I needed to get out of this hell of my own making and escape from the bloodshed. I darted towards the door but found my path blocked. The man in the dark suit and bowler hat was there, inside of the pub and blocking my route to the exit. This was an unusual, frightening figure. His skin, eyes, and lips were all wrong, but worst of all was that hideous smile, a sickening mockery of all things decent. I had no shells left in my gun and no means to get past him. But escape was no longer an option as the pub's interior burst into flames, with the fire consuming everything and everyone in its path. I screamed as my clothes and skin burnt under the intense heat, and the dark-suited man kept smiling as I lost consciousness. I found myself on the street, just across from the Bucket of Blood pub. I knew what I'd come here to do. Carter had screwed me over, disrespected and humiliated me. He was a scumbag who deserved to die, and I was going to be the one to put him down. That's why I bought the sawn-off shotgun from the yardies, why I'd been following Carter for weeks so I knew his routine, how I knew he'd be at this pub on this afternoon. It was all planned out, a premeditated murder I was determined to carry out, no matter the cost. So, why was I having these doubts? Was this a last-minute ping of conscience? This had never affected me before. I felt there was something more, something deeper that I was yet to grasp. But still, I didn't feel I could walk away from this. It seemed it was my destiny to enter that damned pub and face whatever lay inside. The number 7 bus rumbled down the street, and I waited until it passed before I crossed the road. Cold, drizzly rain dropped on my head as I placed my shaking hand on the doorknob, but the cold chill I felt was nothing to do with the weather. Deep down, I knew this wouldn't end well, but I persevered nonetheless, entering the public house and encountering those who seemed like family to me. The bearded man, the red-haired woman, and the young blonde behind the bar. And then, of course, there was Carter, my nemesis, my destiny. I'd carried so much hate in my heart for this man for so long, a murderous rage which had brought me to this time and place. But now I was here. I questioned why I'd gone down the road of violence and revenge. The scene was all too recognizable. The barmaid asking for my drinks order, the crashing of coins falling from the fruit machine. But something was different this time. There was somebody in the pub who wasn't meant to be here, at least not yet. The man in the dark suit, the entity with the inhuman face. He was sitting at the bar, observing everything with his black, unblinking eyes. It chilled me to my bones just to look upon him, but the others in the pub didn't seem aware of the entity's presence, and events moved on regardless. Carter turned in my direction, his eyes lighting up with malice as he spat out his words. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." I went through the motions, pulling the sawn off from under my trench coat and aiming it at my target. My finger was on the trigger, but I didn't shoot. I couldn't shoot. Not this time. Instead, I dropped my gun, throwing it down on the stained pub carpet as I turned my back on my violent intent. I was done with this. But Carter saw my voluntary disarming as a sign of weakness. He grinned menacingly, showing off his gold filling before smashing his pint glass to create his improvised weapon. "You should have stayed at home, mate," he snarled aggressively. "Now I'm going to gut you like a fish." With that, he charged across the dead ground with a jagged glass in hand. I didn't run or try to defend myself. All I wanted was for this nightmare to end, even if it meant my own death. And so I closed my eyes and prepared for the end, expecting to feel the broken glass cutting my neck in mere seconds. But the end didn't come. I opened my eyes in time to witness my savior, the man in the dark suit. He had sat back and watched up until that point, but now he burst into action, darting forward with extraordinary speed and determination. Carter barely had time to see the attack coming, let alone respond to it, and the dark-suited entity used superhuman strength, easily knocking the broken glass from Carter's hand before grabbing him by the throat and snapping his neck like a twig. I watched in astonishment as Carter's lifeless body collapsed down to the carpet, his life apparently snuffed out, but not by my hand. The dark-suited entity turned to face me once the grisly deed was done, the uncomfortably wide grin still on his lips as his black eyes focused upon my person. I felt his gaze burning through me, but there was something else too. The pub had gone deadly silent. The barmaid had stopped screaming and was staring at me with dark eyes, as were the two regulars, the red-headed woman and grey-bearded man. Everyone's attention was on me, but it was left up to the dark-suited man to speak, his tone deep and inhuman, but surprisingly conciliatory at that moment. Well then, my friend, we're finally making some progress. Please, grab a stool so we can talk. I looked towards the door and thought about running, but I reckoned this wouldn't work out too well. It was beginning to come back to me now. The pub, the gun, Carter. I'd been here before, many times perhaps, but I couldn't explain why or how, and only the dark-suited man could give me these answers. So, I sat down on a stool facing the bar as the humanoid entity sat opposite me. I didn't want to look at his face, but forced myself to do so. To my surprise, the entity's features had softened somewhat, with his hideous grin turning into a sympathetic smile and his dark eyes becoming almost human-like. He turned to the dead-eyed blonde behind the bar and ordered a drink for me. "Pour him a double whiskey on the rocks, please, love. He's going to need it." The barmaid did as instructed without comment, robotically pouring the stiff drink and placing the glass on the bar in front of me. I stared at the brown liquid in confusion, but my attention was soon drawn to the corner of the room. There, I was horrified to see Carter's limp body tweak and then clearly move as he slowly and awkwardly pulled himself up from the floor and onto 2 feet. His neck was broken, but his dead eyes were staring directly at me. I reeled back on my stool, but the dark-suited man soon reassured me. "Oh, don't worry, son. He can't hurt you anymore." He nodded his dome-shaped head before continuing. "Now, son, let me ask you a question. Who do you think you are?" He meant this as a question, not a rebuke, but still I was confused. "What do you mean?" I spluttered. "Well, let's start with your name. Can you tell me that?" I thought for a moment but drew a blank. It should be the easiest question in the world, and yet I couldn't remember. Who was I? Where did I come from? I had no idea. Frustrating as it was, all I could remember was the street, the pub, and my murderous rage I held towards Carter. I shook my head in the negative, looking down at the floor as my heart sank. "Interesting," the entity replied thoughtfully. "You have made progress, but still have some way to go. I could wait for you to remember more, but perhaps it's time to reveal the truth." He paused briefly, waiting for me to meet his eye. "Your name is Charlie Hill. In life, you were a small-time criminal and armed robber. In 1990, you were sentenced to a 5-year stretch after a bank job gone wrong. The man you blamed for your incarceration was one Billy Carter." He nodded to the zombie watching us from the corner of the room. "In 1995, you ambushed Carter inside the Bucket of Blood public house, shooting him down in cold blood. There were 3 witnesses to the murder, the barmaid on duty and 2 regular patrons." One by one, I glanced at the trio who'd been caught up in my murderous attack, seeing them look upon me with judgmental eyes. "You were convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison," the entity continued. "And 6 months ago, you died in prison of natural causes. A heart attack, I believe. That's when they sent you here." I felt sick to my stomach, my head spinning as finally the terrible truth was revealed. Instinctively, I reached out for the glass on the bar top, pouring the strong whiskey down my throat in an attempt to calm my nerves. Taking a deep breath, I asked the inevitable next question. "So, this is my punishment then? I'm in hell, aren't I?" "Not exactly," the entity replied with a sly chuckle. "You're being punished for your mortal sin, but all is not lost. You have replayed this scenario thousands of times since your arrival in my realm. Time after time, you gunned Carter down without a second thought. But on these last few occasions, you've showed real progress. Genuine remorse and regret, and a will to break away from the violent cycle." I felt the pressure rising from my chest as suddenly I discovered a glimmer of hope. "So it's over then?" I asked cautiously. "Have I made amends?" The dark-suited man shook his head in the negative. "I'm afraid not, Charlie. You have taken the first steps toward redemption, but the sin you committed on the mortal realm was severe. You still have a long way to go before salvation, my son. But this stage of your journey is over. Remember what you learnt here, Charlie, and I wish you all the best." With that, he offered his bony hand for me to shake. I was reluctant to do so, but realized it was necessary, and so I accepted his icy cold palm and shook. A moment later, the pub once again burst into flames as the holy fire consumed everything and everyone. The barmaid, the regulars, and Carter all disappeared into the flames one by one, leaving only me and the dark-suited entity behind. I watched in horror as the hideous smile returned to his crusty lips and his eyes turned black. But I didn't scream, even as the righteous inferno burnt me up. And before long, the darkness took me, as I was transported to the next phase of my long and arduous journey of redemption. That was Killing Time by Mark Lynch, as performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood.
You know it's bad when even death doesn't get you off the hook. I don't know what that thing in the boulder hat was, but I'm sure it's not handing out second chances for free.
Hell doesn't always have horns, Otis. Sometimes it wears a suit and keeps perfect time.
Up next, we trade time loops for terror in the home, where childhood fears grow up right alongside you. There's no place like home, unless your home is filled with shadows, whispers, and a history you never really escaped. This next tale is a memory long buried and reluctantly unearthed. A story of haunted hallways, midnight screams, and a mirror that shows more than reflection. This is Home Sweet Home by Raz T. Slasher, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. I can't believe I'm finally creating a record of this after so many years. It's not an easy thing to talk about, but my therapist tells me it needs to be done. She says it's time to let go of the past and that talking about it will help me in the long run. I'm not entirely sure I agree with her assessment. Just thinking about it sends chills up and down my spine. The memories of it resurface in my dreams a few times a week, and I wake up in a cold sweat. My wife tells me that sometimes I scream in my sleep, waking her up, but I never remember the screaming. I've told her a little about what happened to me as a kid, but I've never really told her everything. I've always been afraid of getting the look that people sometimes get when you tell them you believe in ghosts. Besides, it's 3 a.m. now, and the apartment's quiet. My wife and the cat are asleep. It's probably not the best time to be reliving this story, but it's not like I'll be sleeping tonight anyway. So, in the hopes of moving on, here is my story. When I was a kid, growing up in the 80s, I lived in that house that every neighborhood has. You know, the type that people generally stay away from and gossip about at the local supermarket. They'll say things like, "I've always had a bad feeling about that place," or, "Hey, did you hear that place was haunted?" I grew up hearing about it from my friends, who must have listened to the stories from their siblings or parents. There were a lot of different versions, of course. Because we lived in Dayton, Ohio, near the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the rumors ran the gamut from aliens to a previous family of serial killers having lived there. As wild as all the tales I've heard were, I can tell you from experience that none were even close to the truth. Mostly it was just my mother, my older brother and sister, and me. Dad was a traveling salesman for a machine company that none of us knew much about, and his presence was a rarity. Nothing happened when Dad was home, or at least nothing he'd admit to. I think we all felt safer when he was there, which wasn't often. We tended to all sleep in the living room while he was gone. None of us really wanted to be alone in his absence. No one stayed over much, but I can't say I blamed them. It's not like many people wanted to talk to the family that lived in that house. What I remember most clearly was something that happened occasionally when Dad was around. I'd wake up in my pajamas, clutching a flashlight in the hallway. I'd tell them the horrors of the night before that led to those mornings, and of course, everyone but Dad would believe me and hang on to my every word. Dad would accuse me of making up stories again, and even went on to claim that I was sleepwalking or suffering from night terrors. The rest of my family knew the dark truths of my midnight wanderings, but even their admissions never swayed them. Many things happened in that house, and momentarily, I'll get to the events that caused us to leave. First, knowing what we saw there would be helpful. From what I've researched about the paranormal since those days, I know we experienced some common occurrences as well as some not-so-common ones. Things would fly off shelves and walls, and you'd smell strange things that weren't there. Our dog, Teak, would freak out at thin air and run around invisible intruders. Some of the less common things included the appearance of full-bodied apparitions, moans, and sometimes screaming, and on a few occasions, smoke would fill and overflow the house. During the instances, the smoke was seen by neighbors, who even called the fire department. Somehow, the firemen could never provide us with any real explanation. The week leading up to our leaving was like any other week. Dad was leaving for a trip and wouldn't be home until the weekend, and, as always, Mom was begging him not to leave us alone in that house. Each night, Mom would make us beds on the floor in the living room while she took the couch. There was an unspoken rule among us not to look into the dining room or down the long, dark hallway to our rooms. Nothing ever good came of it. That night he left seemed about as normal as every other night. The same horrifying sounds came from the depths of the house, and the disembodied shadow people roamed every wall. Each morning, we left school exhausted and became more terrified about returning home when the final bell for the day would sound. How my mother survived there without us, we never knew. Friday rolled around, and we were bolstered by the thought that Dad would return the following afternoon. We settled into a movie marathon in the living room with our little beds all made up and munched on popcorn. And that was the night that things got worse. A massive storm was going on outside, so strong that it sounded like the wind was tearing shingles from the roof. The rain was coming down like mini explosions, echoing through the empty, dark house. I had to go to the bathroom, but the light was at the other end of the hallway, and no one would go with me. Finally, Mom took me by the hand, and we braved the darkness together. We made it down the hallway quicker than usual, tensing at the opening to every even darker room as we passed. Eventually, we made it to the light switch, and everything seemed fine at first. Mom waited in the hall while I closed the bathroom door and turned to look around. Something wasn't right, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. I went to the bathroom and washed my hands at the sink. It wasn't until I looked into the mirror that I noticed what was wrong. 2 people were staring back at me from the reflection. 2 clearly dead people. Their skin was cracked and somehow still bleeding, their eyes hollow and endless. They seemed to be moving closer, but I was frozen in shock. I tried to call out, but the sound just wouldn't come. Sensing something was wrong, my mom tried to open the door, but somehow it was locked, and no matter what she did, it wouldn't budge. According to the view in the mirror, these things were now on either side of me. Suddenly, the realization of who they were hit me, and finally I screamed. It was my brother and sister. I'd just seen them moments ago, alive and well. I was baffled. Suddenly the door popped open and Mom ran in. Just as her arms flew around me, we could hear the earth-shattering screams rip down the hallway from the living room. Just as we turned to run to the source, a nasty bolt of lightning felt like it struck the old TV tower up on top of the house. The floor rumbled and creaked, and suddenly we were plunged into darkness. The closer we got to that living room, the louder the screams got, echoing so harshly that my ears started ringing. The lightning was coming quickly enough to swallow small glimpses of the room between flashes. Not even what I saw in the bathroom prepared me for what I saw next. My brother and sister huddled on the floor together, surrounded by the shadows that had previously only existed on the walls. They were now solid forms, so dark that no light would penetrate them. Dragging me with her, Mom pushed through the figures to get to my brother and sister. We all just latched onto each other, and Mom screamed for us to run. We tried the front door first, but it wasn't budging. Mom grabbed the keys to our van, and my brother and I snatched the 2 emergency flashlights from the hook by the door. Together, we headed toward the old laundry room near the back door. It was the scariest part of the house on a bright sunny day. Even now, the thought of seeing it sends chills up my spine. We reluctantly ran in that direction, chased all the way through the kitchen and dining room by those damn shadows. When we arrived, we found the back door as immobile as the front one had been. We were trapped, and all of us knew it. Then, somehow, the washer and dryer turned themselves on. They were so loud that it sounded like rocks were inside them. We each searched one another's eyes, hoping to find some ray of hope that seemed just out of reach. We stood there for what felt like forever, staring at those shadows as they peered back at us. Out of desperation, Mom herded us back into the living room. The figures just stood there watching us. Had they planned to, they could have grabbed us at any time. It was like they were playing the ultimate game of cat and mouse. Mom rushed us down that long hallway we were all so terrified of. As we passed my brother's and my room on the right, more figures slid out and joined the chase. The hallway ended in a vast space containing doors to the rest of the house. Figures poured from every doorway, keeping us pinned down in the middle of that open space. From above, the attic door began to groan and creak. The wood seemed to warp, bending down toward us. I thought it would crack open to unleash hell at any moment. Suddenly, I could feel hands grabbing at me, hands that didn't belong to anyone in my family. Their grips were ice cold and became painful very quickly. I began to lose consciousness as I felt an intense pressure in my chest, which made it nearly impossible to breathe. I heard my mom praying while my brother and sister were crying. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was a whisper in my left ear. A deep voice said, "You'll never be alone again." We woke up the following day, all huddled in the hall in our pajamas, with 2 flashlights dimmed from low batteries. All the lights were on in the house, and everything was quieter than ever. We were covered in bruises that looked suspiciously like handprints. We moved from room to room together, packing some clothes and a few odds and ends. Mom took us to Granny's house. Having experience with the house, she believed us immediately and told my mother she'd always known that something like this would happen. We went to the airport as a family to pick my father up from his trip. On the way back to Granny's, none of us said much. Dad did most of the talking, telling us about his recent trip to China. He'd brought us back some cool gifts, he said, and couldn't wait to show them to us later. Mom had mentioned we were spending the weekend with Granny, and he didn't seem to mind. Mom hung back to talk to Dad once the rest of us went inside. We overheard them arguing about something, but Granny distracted us before we heard much of anything. Dad came in long enough to pass out the gifts before heading for home. That night we wore the silk dragon pajamas he'd bought us. That night, for the first time in a long time, we slept great. Dad came back the following day to see us. He was white as a sheet and shaking a little. That terrified me, I think, more than the others. Dad was the bravest and strongest man I knew, and seeing him like this was unsettling. He told us we would be staying with Granny for a while, too, but wouldn't say why. A few days later, he sat us down to let us know that we would be moving. He said that he and Mom had been discussing it for a while. They'd bought the house when they were first married and didn't expect such a big family. He called it an upgrade, but we knew it was more than that. In the following couple of weeks, we moved into a new house on the other side of the neighborhood. Dad had sent for our things to ensure none of us had to set foot in that place again. Now and then I drive by the old place. There's always a different family living there, and a for sale sign out front. No one seems to stay there long, and I can imagine why. I've thought about going to an open house to see the place again, but I can never make it past the front porch. Throughout the years, we've all tried cornering my dad to ask him what he'd seen. We wanted to know the real reason we'd moved. He'd always play it off and start talking about the black mold that we all knew wasn't there. It wasn't until the week before he passed away that he finally opened up to me about what he saw. He didn't go into much detail, but he was adamant about my knowing that he believed us. The day he died, we were all together at the hospital, spending the last few hours together as a complete family. Just before he closed his eyes forever, he suddenly grasped my hand and his eyes widened. In a strange voice I recognized only from childhood, he said, "You'll never be alone again." And that was Home Sweet Home by Res T. Slasher, as performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
Let me just say, if the family dog won't go down the hallway, I'm not going down the hallway.
I agree, Malcolm. If the furniture's rearranging itself and the dining room's whispering, maybe it's time to start sleeping outside.
If you enjoyed tonight's journey through haunted hallways, cursed homes, and whispering walls, you're in luck. There's more waiting for you in the patrons area. Extended, ad-free episodes featuring bonus tales and exclusive horrors you won't hear anywhere else.
It's just $7.99 a month, or save big with a yearly plan, and it gives you full access to every story, every scream, without a single commercial break. You'll be supporting indie horror and making sure the doors to the dark stay open.
To join, just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click the Patrons tab, or go straight to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to become a member. Come closer to the stories, if you dare.
From all of us here at Chilling Entertainment, thank you for your support.
If tonight's episode proved anything, it's that some places aren't just creepy, they're hungry. A sealed locker that swallows secrets, a time loop that won't let you leave, a childhood home that remembers too much, cabinets that hum when no one's looking, a locked room that might be downloading something far worse than malware.
Tonight was a reminder that some thresholds are meant to remain untouched, and some memories stay buried for a reason. But horror doesn't wait for permission. It seeps in through every crack between walls, beneath floors, and through screens we leave glowing at night.
If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our parent channel, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, on YouTube, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new nightmare.
And if your craving for darkness goes even deeper, swing by my other show, Otis Jiry's Tales from Duskwood, where I bring you more eerie encounters every Wednesday. You'll find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you haunt your ears.
We also want to hear from you. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and tell us which story stuck with you tonight, or which one you were too afraid to finish alone.
And let's not forget to thank the extraordinary authors who led us into tonight's forbidden places. Without their imaginations, we'd still be safe.
But safe is boring. So the next time someone dares you to open a sealed door, venture into a familiar house, or answer a suspicious call.
Remember, some places just weren't abandoned. They were evacuated.
Sleep well, listeners.
If you can.
Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?